Hello, my name is James Prest. Today we're going to be covering the topic of mind control and brainwashing. You can view the notes for this presentation at answersforadventists.wordpress.com. Click Resources, Documents, and Tips to Avoiding Brainwashing. So let's go ahead and get into it for today. Now, the goal of brainwashing and mind control is to cause a lack of independent thought in an individual. And the reason for that is if somebody's not thinking for themselves, then someone else is thinking for them. For instance, if you're not thinking for yourself and I give you the thought that God doesn't exist, and you accept that greatly will affect your life. And it also may affect how you feel. You may be depressed. So if you're not thinking, someone else is thinking for you, that means you don't have your own thoughts. Someone else is thinking for you. And that also means that it's going to affect your feelings. It's going to affect how you view the world. It's going to affect your happiness. It's going to affect your whole life. So the whole point of mind control is to cause a lack of independent thought. Because if somebody's thinking, this can't happen. But anyway, so that's the goal of mind control. Now, question for you. Do you think? Just because you have thoughts does not mean that you're a thinking individual. For instance, I might not be a thinker, but I have thoughts because I'm taking them from somebody else and reflecting them. I'm quoting from Einstein or something. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to quote from these people. I'm not saying their thoughts aren't good. I'm saying just because you have thoughts doesn't mean you're thinking. Okay, so think about it. Do you think? Do you actually sit down and reason and judge for yourself? I want to read to you from the book Education 17, paragraph 2. It says this: "It is the work of true education to develop this power, to train the youth to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other men's thought." So if the work of true education is to get you to be a thinker, not just, oh, that's a good argument to support my belief, let me use that one. No. Come up with your own arguments. Maybe you can use theirs, but make sure it's right. Don't just assume that it's a good argument. It may be the weakest one out there. I also want to read to you from the same book, Education 230, paragraph 3. Listen very closely to this, because this is going to be covering exactly what I just said. It says, "The education that consists in the training of the memory, tending to discourage independent thought, has a moral bearing which is too little appreciated. As the student sacrifices the power and reason to judge for himself, he becomes incapable of discriminating between truth and error and falls an easy prey to deception. He is easily led to follow tradition and custom." So the education, now she talks that consists in the training of the memory, okay? And it tends to discourage independent thought. But there's nothing wrong with memorizing of itself. The problem is when it's tending to discourage independent thought. Anything that tends to discourage independent thought has a moral bearing which is too little appreciated, because it causes the individual to sacrifice the power to reason and judge for himself. They become incapable of discriminating between truth and error, and they fall an easy prey to deception. They're easily led to follow tradition and custom. So, again, the goal of mind control is to cause a lack of independent thought in an individual, because if they're not thinking, someone else is thinking for them. They're going to follow the traditions of the fathers. They're going to accept the opinions of the church clergy. This is not what we want, because this is brainwashing, okay? Go memorize that statement, by the way. Education 230, paragraph 3. Very powerful. Study that out. A few paragraphs down, it says if people do this, if their independent thoughts are discouraged and they become incapable of discriminating between truth and error, she makes it very plain that they will, sooner or later, be led into deception. Now here's some brainwashing techniques to watch out for. Keeping what we just talked about in mind, these are some techniques that are often used. I find that most of them kind of fit into this. Assumptions. It's one of the most supreme principles of brainwashing to get someone to believe something that's based off of assumptions instead of real evidence. For instance, the atheists are upset with religions and Christianity because Christianity bases its whole beliefs off the assumption that there is a God, okay? And they don't like that. And so they're very opposed to that idea, okay? But when you ask them and you say, okay, so where's the evidence for your belief that there is no God, or prove that there is no God, they can't do it, okay? They're basing their beliefs off the assumption that there is no God. Well, what we want to do is get rid of all assumptions. We don't want to assume that Uriah Smith's logic is right. We don't want to assume that, anybody's interpretation of the Bible is right. We don't want to just assume that the Bible's right. We want to test it and prove it. See if it's really the case. Okay? So assuming. Now, let me give you another example of this, how assuming things actually changes how people do things. I studied door-to-door sales. I've done door-to-door sales before, and when they train you, they'll train you to assume the sale upon the individual. So these are the books, this is how much they cost. Would you be paying cash or check? And so you assume that okay, which one do you want to pay with, cash or check? Well, the reality is they haven't decided they're getting the book yet. You're assuming, you're basically deciding for them as far as possible that they're getting the book before they ever decided that. Okay? This is not the way to go about literature evangelism or door-to-door sales. Okay? People say, oh, but if you do that, if you don't use this principle, you'll lose sales. And you may lose sales, but I haven't. In fact, I'll say, look, these are the books, this is how much they cost. Is this something you would be interested in? My sales have not gone down, okay? But I'm against controlling people, brainwashing them, manipulating them into doing something that they otherwise would not do. Persuasive reasoning, go ahead and use that. But don't brainwash people, don't play mind games with them. Because it's annoying to people, and while they may get your book, they may throw it in the trash because they realize that you tricked them. They never decided to get the book, okay? So assumptions. Don't assume that the doctrine's correct. Don't assume anything, okay? You have to study for yourself. Now, so assuming information upon people is one method of brainwashing and mind control. Another technique that's used is information distortion. You just lie basically about the information. Change the statistics around a little bit. Don't give all the details. When you do this, when you distort the information in this way, it's basically lying. The only way to really avoid it and make sure that you're not getting distorted information and you're being brainwashed, the only way to avoid this really is to go deep, study, and do your own research. But again, that's the key. Just always study and do your own research. Don't believe it, people's assumptions. Don't accept what they're saying as fact, because they could be distorting the information. Another one is information limitation. If you limit the options of what someone can believe and what someone can study, then what they're going to believe and study is going to be what they were limited to. For instance, if you live in another country and the only thing you've ever heard of is Islam, then you're going to be Islam, okay? Or you're going to be Muslim, or you're going to be atheist. If that's the only thing you've heard, then that's what you're going to be likely to believe. So people can be brainwashed and get to believe things based off of limiting the amount of information they're allowed to have. And this can be done in more than one way. For instance, let's say you go to a Christian school, an Adventist school, and they take all the books out of the library on topics that they don't want you studying. They don't want you studying that religion. They don't want you looking at this different view, because they want you to believe all the right things, right? So what is the students going to study and believe? Well, what they are given the option to. Now, people may say, oh, but James, you have to understand, they have the internet. They can go online and figure out whatever they want. That may be true, but check this out. If the students have to study for the test, do their homework assignments, and have any sort of a life, they're not going to be spending their time looking at other views and opinions because they have to pass the test so they can graduate and get the degree, okay? So if you overload them with work, you're limiting their time, and if you're limiting their time, you're limiting what they have to study because they don't have the time to study it. But don't base any conclusions. For instance, if you're going to believe Ellen White is a prophet, don't just believe Ellen White's a prophet until you look at the opposing side. Why? Because I'll get to it in just a sec, but the truth can afford to be fair. Okay? How can you make an intelligent decision based off of, well, this is the only side I've seen, but I'm not going to look at the other side. I'm just going to believe this. Well, you're basing your decision off of personal ignorance because you don't see the other side. You don't see the opposition to Ellen White. So you're basing your decision off of personal ignorance because you don't know what the other side is. That's really not a good way to go about things. For instance, let's say I present this presentation, or you watch my presentation on the latter rain, and how it's present and falling, and you don't listen to anything else, well, chances are you're going to be you are basing your conclusion off of personal ignorance because you've not seen the opposition, okay? So you need to look at everything. Don't be biased about this. Don't be a hypocrite. If you want other people to consider something other than the Bible, then you should do it too. If you want somebody to consider something other than their beliefs, then you need to be willing to do it too. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite, okay? But there's different ways you can limit information. You can limit the information itself, or you can limit their time by overloading them with other things that they have to do. So those are the three things. Assuming that information is true, or assuming the sale in case of sales. This is mind control and brainwashing. Limiting information and distorting information. Generally, everything falls under those three different categories. Now, I want to give you some examples of evidence-lacking phrases to watch out for. Basically, these are smoke puffs. It's an introduction to a sentence that they're trying to get you to believe it because, for instance, most scholars agree that. Let me just read you the list. It is widely accepted that. It is commonly believed that. Everyone knows that. Most scholars agree that. Even Islam believes that. Even atheists believe that. You just have to understand that. What these are evidence-lacking phrases that are trying to make it sound more true, what it is they say after this introduction. They're trying to make it sound more true because they don't have evidence. Who cares if most scholars agree that the moon is made out of blue cheese? That doesn't mean it's true. Who cares that most Adventist scholars agree that the little horn of Daniel 7 is the paper? I mean, most scholars might be wrong. This has happened many, many times, okay? So don't fall for these little phrases. Most scholars agree. Here, this is one. You just need to realize that the Bible's true, okay? Just pull the wool over your own eyes and it will solve all your problems, okay? Just pull it over. Whoa, it's all true. No, don't do that, okay? Because you're brainwashing yourself. If you need to realize something, what you need to do is you need to get the information and the evidence and study out for yourself, and then you will realize whatever that evidence is pointing to, okay? But don't just realize something without any evidence. That's pulling the wool over your own eyes, brainwashing yourself, and you don't really want to do that, okay? So watch out for those phrases, most scholars. That doesn't mean anything. That's no evidence for anything other than that most scholars agree that. It doesn't prove anything, okay? Now, I want you to consider, I've got a list of points here. Watch out for people who do the following things. I'll go through the list here. And I'll give you examples as I'm going through. But watch out for people who believe that close investigation of their religious claims is dangerous. Watch out for people who say, don't question the doctrine because that's dangerous. Okay, now I'm going to read to you from Ellen White's writings in Review and Herald on December 20, 1892, paragraph 1. It says this, listen closely. It says, there is no excuse for anyone in taking the position that there is no more truth to be revealed and that all our expositions of Scripture are without an error. The fact that certain doctrines have been held as truth for many years by our people is not a proof that our ideas are infallible. Age will not make error into truth, and truth can afford to be fair. No true doctrine will lose anything by close investigation. We are living in perilous times, and it does not become us to accept everything claimed to be truth without examining it thoroughly. Okay? So there's no excuse to say that all our Adventist beliefs are infallible. There's no excuse to say there's no error in there. She says it. There's no excuse for anyone. She says that the truth can afford to be fair and that no true doctrine will lose anything by close investigation. If people are saying, don't go to the anti-Ellen White sites or the anti-Adventist sites because you'll lose your faith, that's walking on Satan's ground. Okay? If you're wanting an excuse to sin, then yeah, that may be. Okay? But if you're honestly seeking, if you want to find a solid foundation for your faith, which you're required to do, then no true doctrine will lose anything by close investigation. I've gone to the anti-Bible website, I've gone to the anti-Ellen White website, and I closely investigate it. Why? Because I don't want to base my conclusions, I don't want to base my acceptance of Ellen White off of personal ignorance, because I haven't seen the other side. I want to be familiar with the facts, familiar with what the people are saying, and then look at all the evidence and make an intelligent decision. If you base your evidence or your faith in Ellen White or the Bible off of personal ignorance, when the time of testing and trial comes, you will realize, Satan will cause you to realize that you're basing your beliefs off of ignorance, and it will be easy for him to wash you away in the storm. Okay? So we don't want to do that. Truth can afford to be fair. If Ellen White's speaking the truth, if the Bible's true, you can go anywhere else, and you'll only find evidence to support it, because the truth can afford to be fair. You don't need to hide from all these. You don't need to discourage other people from looking. You don't need to hide from an anti-Ellen. Go look at it, okay? Now, having been there, I will say, make sure that you're looking at things closely, because these sites are designed to try to get you to doubt in Ellen White, or at least that's what it appears to be, okay? I can make the Bible look like it's wrong. I can make anything look like it's wrong, okay? So you have to look at it yourself and go through it, and if you find anything on there that's interesting or that makes you doubt Ellen White, then maybe she's wrong, okay? You can always ask me. I've looked through their sites. I think it's a lot of baloney, but, do your own research. Don't base your belief off of your personal ignorance and trust my knowledge, because you're basing your beliefs off of ignorance again. Don't do that. Now, let me get on to point number 2. I have a good list of points here. If you have someone in the group who decides for the rest of the group what is and what is not true, there's a very serious problem, okay? How about I can be the one in the group that decides for all the group that's watching this what is and what is not true? I mean, how about we just do that? I mean, just trust my judgment on this, okay? That's not going to fly. Now, with the Adventist Church, and if I'm not mistaken, all Christian churches basically, they have this idea that the General Conference, or the highest authority in the church, can decide what is and what is not a correct interpretation of the Scriptures, and then require all their members to believe it on pain of disfellowshipment. Okay? This is baloney, all right? If you read in Desire of Ages 4:14, paragraph 3, it says this: many claim that a position of trust in the church gives them authority to dictate what other men shall believe and what they shall do. This claim God does not sanction. Okay? So, in other words, you have the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They claim this position of trust, or they claim that their position of trust as General Conference, as people in the General Conference, members of the General Conference, they claim that this position of trust that they have gives them authority to tell what other people, or what all the members of the church are to believe. And what does it say? It says this claim God does not sanction. The Bible says that no prophecy of the Scripture is of any private interpretation. Well, what is the General Conference doing when they get together and privately interpret the Scriptures? Well, they're getting together and privately interpreting the Scriptures for everyone else. God has never said that we are required to accept the interpretations of another man in order to be part of God's church. He never did anything like this. God does not sanction this, okay? If we're supposed to accept the interpretations of the church, the highest authority in the church, and that's the end of the story because that stands as the voice of God, or whatever the argument is, then we should all be Catholics, because the Reformers back in the day should have never opposed the church clergy. They should have never opposed the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, just think about this. No prophecy of the Scriptures of any private interpretation, and this statement in Desire of Ages 4:14, paragraph 3. Many claim, I'm reading it to you again, many claim that a position of trust in the church, General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, gives them authority to dictate what other men shall believe and what they shall do. This claim God does not sanction. So either the Adventist Church is in error in doing that, or they're doing something wrong, or Ellen White's a liar. Okay, it's real simple. All right. Now let me get into point number 3. If people tell you it's safe to trust their judgment, I was talking with this one person. I'm investigating, why I believe Ellen White, looking at anti-Ellen White websites and stuff, and this guy tells me, he says, when I was your age, I had the same questions, but one of the best things I ever did was just trust them, that they had already studied it, they had already researched it, and they came to the conclusions and chose to believe it, and so I chose to just trust them, James, and you should do that too. Okay, let me tell you what this is. This is saying that, look, I mean, this, and the guy literally said this. He said, I'm older and more experienced in research than you. You should trust my judgment. So in other words, he wanted me to believe in Ellen White and believe all this stuff based off of personal ignorance. Now what's interesting is this guy based his beliefs and his acceptance of Ellen White off of what? Well, he just trusted the older people and experience than him, right? Isn't that what he did? So he based his beliefs off of personal ignorance, and he wanted me to trust his conclusions and research, but he never did it because he was personally ignorant. Okay? Well, what about the people that he took their word for? Were they personally ignorant too? I mean, we can't base our faith and beliefs off of personal ignorance. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, now I'll read to you, let's read the rest of the statement in Desire of Ages, 414, paragraph 3. I mean, if you just read the paragraph, it clears up so many problems here. It says, the Savior declares, all ye are brethren, all are exposed to temptation and are liable to error. Upon no finite being can we depend for guidance. I can't just believe this guy. Oh, he's older and more researched. I'll just rest my faith on that. That's basing it off personal ignorance. That's depending upon a human being for guidance, a finite being. You can't do this. This is wrong. Now I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to go here. But I'll be back with you in just a sec with part 2. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again in a sec. Bye.